Move over, Artoria, because we're now one step closer to a full Fox team. Hello everyone, Sobroni of G&A Reviews here, bringing you a New Year spotlight for the most fluffy servant in all of Chaldea, Konyanskaya of Darkness. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over points to how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 5-star servants. So if you're ready to ring in the new year with your Fox waifu, then make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell so you can catch all of these spotlight videos as they go up, and you can help out the channel. And now, on to Konyanskaya's stats. Konyanskaya has a max HP of 14,700 and a max attack of 11,220. She has above average HP for a foreigner servant, but her attack is on the low end for her class. Even outside of the foreigner class, Konyanskaya's HP is fairly high for an SSR servant, while her attack is well below the average. When it comes to her command cards, Konyanskaya has 4 hits on her quick card, 3 hits on her arts, 3 hits on her buster, and 5 hits on her extra card. She has an NP gain rate of 0.67% and a star rate of 14.8%. Both her NP gain and star generating are good due to her high hit counts and her rates. Overall, Konyanskaya has surprisingly well balanced and somewhat defensive stats, very similar to an all-rounder or semi-support. Taking a look at her skills, Konyanskaya's first skill is Dominator Fox, rank A. This skill increases the party's buster card effectiveness for 3 turns between 20 and 30%, and charges the party's NP gauge between 20 and 30%, both effects depending on level, and it will also reduce the critical star absorption rate of hominid servants by 100% for 1 turn. Her second skill is Slaughter Beast Troop, rank A. This skill overcharges an ally's NP by 2 stages for 1 time, lasting for 3 turns. It also grants a buff on attack for 3 turns that generates 5 crit stars when attacking with buster cards. In addition to those effects, it will also increase the attack of animal characteristic servants for 3 turns between 21 and 30%, and it will also increase the defense of animal characteristic servants for 3 turns between 21 and 30%, both effects depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Goddess Metamorphosis Beast, rank B. This skill grants Konyanskaya Ignore Invincibility for 3 turns, increases her crit damage for 3 turns between 30 and 50%, and grants her attacks an on-attack effect for 3 turns, which inflicts Poison, Curse, and Burn on every enemy she hits, and inflicts Toxic, Evil Curse, and Spread Fire to all enemies. Moving on to her passives, Konyanskaya has Existence Outside the Domain, rank C, which generates 2 crit stars every turn, and increases her own debuff resistance by 6%, and FF Services, rank EX, which increases her damage against wild beast enemies by 20%, increases her arts card effectiveness by 5%, and her debuff success rate by 10%, and Nega Self, rank C. This passive grants her attacks a 20% chance to inflict buff block on an enemy as long as they have the wild beast attribute. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Konyanskaya has a Buster Arts deck with Quick Arts Arts, Buster Buster, and a Buster Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Tunguska 9 Drive, which is an AoE buster attack that deals damage to all enemies, with a damage modifier between 300 and 500% depending on NP level. It also increases Konyanskaya's attack by 20% for 1 turn, removes all offensive buffs from enemies, and reduces their buster resistance by 20% for 3 turns. In addition, it will also deal extra damage against Earth attribute enemies between 150 and 200% depending on overcharge. As a foreigner, Konyanskaya acts for a ton of Ascension mats with a lot of variety, so leveling her can be a little frustrating and difficult. For level Ascension, she's going to need 10 each of Void Dust, Forbidden Chains, Phoenix Plumes, Black Tar, Talons, Lenugos, Bloodstone Crystals, and Comet Shards. As for her skill leveling, Konyanskaya is going to need 10 each of Hero's Proof and Evil Bones, 12 each of Homunculus Baby, Spinal Fluids, and Giant Rings, and 15 each of Ancient Cores, Mirrors, and Comet Shards. I have a confession to make. I'm not much of a Tamamo fan, but with that said, even I have to admit that Konyanskaya of Darkness is one of the most aesthetically beautiful servants that we've ever had in FGO. I mean, have you seen those ear fluffs? Absolutely irresistible. But Konyanskaya doesn't just impress with her looks, she's also a complete monster on the battlefield. Her stats are a little unassuming though. She has strong HP and decent star generating and NP gain, but her low attack is a little problematic. Her passives do make up for the low attack a little bit by giving her a huge 20% damage boost and an RNG buff block effect against Wild Beast for free. However, it's a very situational niche since Wild Beasts are not the most common enemy type. But what really elevates Konyanskaya to the next level in terms of her gameplay is her kit. Her first skill, Dominator Fox, is a party-wide 30% buster buff and NP charge that also lowers the star weight of hominid servants by 100%. I should mention this now, but as we go through Konyanskaya's skills, skills, you may notice a little theme. And that theme is that at first glance, most of her skills look like they are very good support skills that buff the party, as well as Konyanskaya herself, which may lead you to believe that she's more of an all-rounder or off-support type of unit. But that's only half true, because if you look a little closer, you'll notice that all of her skills are actually just selfish buffs that work far better on her than anyone else in your party. And Dominator Fox is a great example of that. Now 30% NP charge for the party is phenomenal, and it can even help set up some looping team, while the Buster buff is also not insignificant. 30% Buster up for 3 turns is a lot, so this is a good support skill for the party. But for Konyanskaya herself, this is absolutely bonkers. That NP charge means that she can Buster loop with Oberon and Vich setups, and the 30% buff for 3 turns helps her keep up her damage consistently on every wave, and even double stack the buff on the 3rd wave to get a 60% Buster up, which makes the buff even stronger than a mana burst. Not only that, but the extra effect of lowering star weight on hominid allies means that any non-animal servant in your party will effectively lose all of their star absorb, meaning that Konyanskaya herself, being an animal, can guarantee a full turn of crit damage for herself. This skill makes her very strong and consistent in crit teams even outside of farming. The theme also carries over to her second skill, Slaughter Beast. It grants one ally 2 stages of NP overcharge and the ability to generate 5 crit stars every time they use a Buster card. And if that ally just so happens to be an animal, they also gain a 30% attack and defense boost for 3 turns. This one is a bit more direct on how it favors using it on Konyanskaya over other servants. There are very few animal characteristic servants, so outside of some kind of specialized team comp with Menace or Draco, Konyanskaya will target herself with this skill 95% of the time, since the extra damage and defense buffs are just too good to go to waste. Finally, she has Goddess Metamorphosis. This skill does a lot, but to simplify it, it basically grants Konyanskaya Invincibility Pierce, 50% crit damage up, and it gives all her attacks the ability to inflict burn, curse, and poison simultaneously. This skill is incredibly versatile for challenge quests. Firstly, it's a 3-turn Invincibility Pierce, which is exceedingly rare, and it lets Konyanskaya hit through almost anything whenever she wants. Secondly, the crit buff synergizes well with both of her other skills to make her a completely self-sufficient crit DPS, which gives her good burst damage outside of her NP. And thirdly, she's one of the only servants who can actually burn an enemy to death through dot effects. Each of her attacks inflicts all 3 of the status ailments, so combined with Toxic, Spread Fire, and Evil Curse, it adds an extra 3000 damage per hit. So if Konyanskaya uses a Brave Chain on an enemy, that enemy is going to take 12,000 extra damage at the end of the turn. It may not seem like much, but it can really add up, especially if you're soloing with her. And it can be a quick and easy way of bypassing challenge quests where enemies stack dozens of defense buffs. All of Konyanskaya's skills are great, but definitely level Dominator Fox first for that NP charge, followed by her attack buff, and then Goddess Metamorphosis last. Mana loading is also worth picking up to give Konyanskaya more consistent looping. Konya's Noble Phantasm is an AoE buster attack that buffs her damage by 20%. It also removes all offensive buffs from enemies, reduces their buster resist, and deals additional damage to Earth attribute enemies. There's a lot to say about this NP, most importantly though is that it's an excellent farming tool. Being an AoE buster syncs up well with the current meta since she can loop it with Vich and Oberon, and the attack buff combined with her buster buff and the other attack buff gives her a 95% bonus damage to the first 2 waves and over 120% on the last wave. So suffice it to say, Konyanskaya is no support. She is stacked to her fluffy ears in damage buffs, which is why I cautioned about looking at her as a semi-support earlier, because sure, she can be a support in niche buster teams, but if you do that, you're vastly underutilizing her. Konyanskaya is first and foremost a selfish buster farmer with an absurdly strong NP. Speaking of which, the other half of her NP lends itself very well to challenge quests. Having AoE buff removal on a loopable Noble Phantasm is bananas, and it can trivialize a lot of difficult fights before the enemy can even have a chance to ramp up. Buster Resist Down helps Konyanskaya and the party keep sustained damage over time for longer fights, and the vast majority of enemy servants have the Earth attribute, so Konyanskaya gets a huge damage buff against them. All of this on top of the Invincibility Pierce and Status Affliction gives her an excellent toolkit for dealing with all types of enemy servants and boss fights. Konyanskaya also doesn't necessarily need to rely on her higher NP for damage. While it does do very good damage even against single enemies, Konyanskaya also manages to have one of the best crit DPS kits in the game, along with access to some of the best crit buffers in the game like Van Gogh and Himiko. In fact, in certain crit comps, she can even hit Super Orion levels of damage, making Konyanskaya not only an excellent farmer, but boss killer as well. But for as strong as Konyanskaya is, this is still the part of the video where I am legally obligated to list some of her weaknesses. For one thing, while a strong Buster Looper, Konyanskaya isn't the best. She isn't quite up there with menace and some of the better Buster Loopers that we'll get in the future. Konyanskaya also kind of feels like a toy for whales, given that you need a lot of the top tier limited servants to bring out the best of her. Not to say that she's not good if you're free to play or a newer player, just that she'll perform drastically better on high end teams. And speaking of which, when it comes to team comps, Konyanskaya falls into one of two camps. You either want to provide her with a good crit support to help keep her damage high in boss encounters, or you want to pair her with strong NP batteries so she can farm effectively. As I mentioned before, Himiko and Van Gogh are prime crit support candidates, while Oberon and Vitch will be your go-to for farming supports. Konyanskaya being a foreigner means that she benefits from Go's insane crit buffing, which enables her to hit the same levels of ludicrous damage that Go and Super Orion can. Himiko also helps out with some excellent buster buffing on top of the crit support. Vitch and Oberon are self-explanatory. They enable the current Buster Looper meta, of which Konyanskaya is a top tier candidate. But if you're looking for something more on the free-to-play side, Santa Martha is also an excellent support, as she not only buffs Konyanskaya's damage, but can also provide support in challenge quests via debuffs, can provide crit support, and can even be an NP battery. Konyanskaya's Bond CE is Ambition of Konyanskaya Eurasia Edition. It increases the party's Buster card effectiveness by 10% and attack of animal allies by 10%. This isn't really worth using, both due to the underwhelming stats and the underwhelming buff. Instead, stick to the typical CEs for farming, like Aerial Drive and K-Scope, or crit buffing CEs like Joint Recital and Like a Bird. In the future, Summer Break is a nice choice for her as well, since it not only buffs Buster and NP damage, but also grants Defense Pierce, which pairs extremely well with Konyanskaya's own Invincibility Pierce. As for command codes, any crit buffing code is ideal, especially ones that buff Buster crit damage, like Mistress of Heaven. Overall, Konyanskaya of Darkness is an exceedingly strong servant in just about every offensive role. She's a top tier Buster servant with an extremely powerful NP, she has immense amounts of utility for a DPS, which allows her to be a threat in nearly any boss fight, she has insane crit DPS potential, and she can even function as a decent off support when she isn't in the star role of your lineup. If I were to nitpick some weaknesses of hers, she does have longer than average cooldowns on her skills, and she isn't as new player friendly since you'll need a lot of the top tier supports to bring out the best in her. So all in all, Konyanskaya gets my first ever S-. Yes, an S-. This is cheating a bit, but it is really hard to decide on a score for her. Koyanskaya of Darkness, when used at her best, is better than almost any other AoE servant in the game in terms of versatility and her raw damage capability. But she isn't exactly game-changing or meta-defining. She's basically as good as a DPS can be without being Spishtar or menace. Plus, the fact that she does need some high-end support to shine in those roles does make her feel more like a toy for whales rather than a game-changer for everyone, if that makes sense. And those are my thoughts on Koyanskaya of Darkness. Like I said, it's really hard to define her with a grade because she's so incredibly good without being too good. So she kind of gets lost in the scramble among all the broken OP Buster Loopers. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over on our Discord, follow us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.